So moral principles are those foundational ways of thinking that should guide researchers, and the code is an attempt to put that into a set of guidelines to be complied with that are a little more tangible. So once again, these stemmed from things like the Nuremberg trials, and in particular, the first part of the code stems directly from the trials that were taking place to prosecute those who committed war crimes in World War II. And the war crimes in particular were those in the names of research. There are a couple of short video links that you can watch. I cannot show them in this medium, but I encourage you to click on them as you work through this content. So, as we discussed in our first lecture, cruel atrocities have been committed on innocent people in the name of research. These included physically cruel treatments like the experiments on prisoners in World War II, but also the disease and early death suffered by the individuals in the Tuskegee syphilis study, and we've discussed these earlier. So what came out of the Nuremberg trials? Well, the Nuremberg Code was developed in response to that. And so there are a number of things that emerged here, and then after I discuss these, I'll show you some of the highlights. So this first bullet point is suggesting that each individual who participates in a study must know what's going on, be well informed, and volunteer to participate. Secondly, every experiment should aim at positive results for society that cannot be procured in some other way. So we can't do needless experiments. Each experiment shouldn't just be pulled out of the air. It should be based and built upon previous knowledge that justifies the experiment. So that's the literature review that you're all doing. It should be set up in a way that avoids unnecessary physical and mental suffering and injuries, or in otherwise we minimize the risk to the individuals. If there is any reason, looking at number 5, to believe that it implies a risk of death or disablement, it should not be conducted. The people who are here and healthy, they can't be compromised in that way. The risks should be in proportion to the benefits, so we shouldn't have risks that are greater than the potential benefits to humanity. 7, preparations and facilities must be in place to protect the people against the risks. So if there are risks, first off, we have to have it in a way that minimizes those, and secondly, we need to take care to ensure that individuals are cared for if anything should occur. 8, the staff who conduct or take part in the experiment have to be trained and qualified. So we can't have people who don't really understand science attempting to conduct experiments. 9, every individual must be free to quit the experiment immediately at any point when they feel that need. And finally, the medical staff have to stop the experiment if they observe that there's a danger to the participants. So this is a code, and a code is like a set of guidelines. In a nutshell, this code, says we have to have qualified researchers, people have to know what they're doing, informed consent, participants have to be free to leave, and the risk-benefit ratio must be favorable. So the Belmont report then is getting to a bit more systemization of this. And this was a little bit later, you can see 1976, and that was responding to, even after the Nuremberg Code, studies that took place that were harmful. All 3 of these we looked at, but the Milgram Obedience Study, the Stanford Prison Study, and the Tuskegee Syphilis Study all took place after the Nuremberg Code was made. And so the National Commission for the Protection of Human Subjects of Biomedical and Behavioral Research did a report. It was called the Belmont Report. And they stipulated that, number 1, studies had to show respect for persons. We had to respect that people were autonomous agents. That means that they have the power, capacity, and right to act on their own behalf. And if they don't, if they're vulnerable in some way, or if they have diminished autonomy because maybe they're ill or mentally ill or disabled in some way, or maybe they're children, or maybe they're in prison, they don't have a way to act on their own behalf, then we have to go through extra means to protect them. The second principle is beneficence, that we have to minimize harms and maximize benefits. And so we do everything in the experiment to find out what we need to find out, which are the benefits, but to absolutely have as little risk to participants as possible. And thirdly, justice. We distribute the benefits and risks fairly across individuals. So let's look at these in a little more detail. So the basic principles: respect for persons, beneficence, and justice. And the justice example in particular suggests that, let's say we're treating a new medicine, and half of the people, in order to know whether the medicine works, we have to assign half of the people to not receive the medicine, to receive a placebo, because otherwise we can't know if the medicine works. But if the medicine does indeed work, after the experiment or in a counterbalance design, those who did not receive the medicine must have access to it. We can't just prevent them from receiving the medicine because they didn't happen to be assigned to the treatment group. Secondly, the second cluster of things that we didn't talk about, we have to assess the risks and benefits, as we talked about with a beneficence clause. When we select people, we have to have principles for who we include in our study and who we exclude. So if people are eligible for research, or if we want them for research, we have to think about what's fair to them with the principle of justice. And so we have objective means that are established ahead of time for deciding who will be included and who will be excluded. And let's say we have a medicine for COVID, and we're doing an experiment to find out if it's effective, but we are pretty sure it's effective. We cannot say choose our wife or our husband to get the medicine because we know it's going to help. We have to stay with the people who are. We have to be fair. And thirdly, informed consent. And I'll read this to you because we're going to talk about it more later. To the full degree with which they are capable, research participants must be informed about the nature of the research they are taking part in and must consent to the collection and use of data they generate as part of any study. Research participants are volunteers and thus can stop participating at any point, free of any consequence. And then how do we ensure that these guidelines are followed? Well, there has to be an institutional review board that looks over every single proposal that involves human subjects. And this institutional review board is responsible for seeing that the rights of subjects are respected. And in fact, the IRB also must monitor the study to make sure the protocol doesn't change and look at the results of the study as they come out. And so this is a big responsibility at the IRB.